Quenching Jamaica's drought, exploring solutions for consistent water supply. That's our focus this morning as we welcome you to another webinar hosted by the Office of Utilities Regulation here in Jamaica as we put the spotlight on another salient issue that impacts us all. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. I am Elizabeth Bennett Marsh, the Public Education Specialist at the Office of Utilities Regulation. Earlier this year, the National Water Commission imposed water restrictions in several areas, especially in the corporate area, in light of continued dry spell, which affected the majority of the systems, resulting in significant declines in inflows and storage levels. Systems such as the Mona Reservoir and the Constant Spring Treatment Plant in the corporate area, and the Logwood Facility in Hanover, Queen of Spain Wells in Trelawney, and the Haining and Long Bay systems in Portland were heavily affected. The expected consistent rainfall in May did not come. And when the severe drought prolonged, the NWC further implemented a prohibition order banning the use of water for activities that were deemed non-essential, such as the washing of vehicles and watering of lawns. The NWC lifted the prohibition order on October 6th as recorded improved rainfall, and on October 26th, it announced the removal of water supply regulations that were implemented due to the drought conditions. But despite this, drought is consistent, and it's a consistent problem that we face almost every year, and it is timely that we again put on the table, how do we ensure consistent water supply during such a period? Do we have a water shortage issue? Some would argue no. So to explore this, we have assembled a panel to get the diverse perspective. Professor Mark Harris from the Department of Biology, Chemistry, and Environmental Science from the Northern Caribbean University. Tashana Miller, our Senior Regulatory Analyst here at the OUR. Peter Clark, the Managing Director of the Water Resources Authority, and Glazer Cunningham, the Vice President for Enterprise Development and Performance Monitoring at the National Water Commission. Gentlemen, lady, welcome. We're so happy to have you here today. So each presenter will present on the topic, after which we have a discussion and we take your questions, which you can drop in the chat in the YouTube or the Facebook feed. We want to thank you for being a part of this very important engagement today. Without further ado, our first presenter is Professor Mark Harris, who has done some research on this issue and has authored more than 30 research papers and several books, including one entitled Confronting Global Climate Change, Experiments and Applications in the Tropics. In 2021, Professor Harris was awarded the Silver Musgrave Medal for Outstanding Merit in the Field of Science by the Council of the Institute of Jamaica. Prof, we're happy to have you here today, and we now invite you to weigh in on this very important issue. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be looking at water banking in Jamaica. We know what banking is. You put something away for a rainy day, no pun intended. All right, so we want to, we want to look at the background to drought. We have three major kinds of drought. We have hydrological drought, we have meteorological drought, and agricultural drought. We concentrate on hydrological problems and how they are fixed rather than meteorological. We can do nothing about meteorological problems, notwithstanding the failures of cloud seeding. So let's move on. The rock types in Jamaica that we are concerned with, we want to look at the John Crow Mountains, call it JC Blue Mountains PM. And we want to look at aquifers because this is what they are. But the John Crow Mountain is much more efficient because it's a limestone fractured aquifer, which fills up very readily and quickly. And but the Blue Mountain aquifers are thinner, and they are not as permeable as a white limestone aquifer. And then we look at the aquiclude, which entails a lot of the Blue Mountain rocks, the meta rocks, metamorphics, meta sediments, and so on, right? And that's the problem with the Blue Mountain aquifer. It's not as productive as the John Crow Mountains aquifer. Now, might ask why we're doing this, because the Blue Mountain and John Crow Mountains, they lie in the eastern section of Jamaica. And both these are higher, substantially higher than anywhere else. And so therefore we want to move the water from these aquifers into the areas that haven't got the water at the time when these aquifers are very full or nearly full. That's why we say we bring it's water banking in those times. All right, now I have here some methodologies. I'm not going to dwell on them because time is short, but I look at the last one, MAQ, aquifer cannot recharge. We're going to look at what a cannot is and how that can help to bring tunnel the water in from the aquifers. And the reason we're talking about aquifers is because, aquifer to aquifer transfer, we can't deal with surface, pools because, they look at here, we have the evaporation of surface water being almost 50% in Jamaica. So any water transfer has to be underground or in pipes. All right, we can see the runoff, 12% wasted to the sea. Those waters, if they were not wasted, could have been much more useful. That's the problem. They were that surface thing. So we want to take the surface and bank it into the ground, like the diagram on the right, because it's low security when it's on the surface. So that's the objective. And that's the John Crow Mountain aquifer there on the right-hand side in the east. Small aquifer, it seems, but it's very powerful because it is deep, and it fills up very quickly. Okay, let's go back here. And what's the evidence for this? The John Crow Mountain aquifer. All right, it's over 1,500 meters in altitude. It's a high runoff of the Rio Grande. Now, many people feel that the Black River is the largest river in Jamaica. Yes, it is, but it's not. It's a baby compared to Rio Grande as far as runoff is concerned, okay? And it's runoff that we're interested in. Also, the evidence of the utility of the John Crow aquifers that when 2/3 of the aquifers are low on water in Jamaica, the John Crow Mountain is still going strong. And the evidence of that, all right. Another evidence of that is the configuration of the onshore winds in Jamaica. The John Crow Mountains take a lot of wind, takes the strongest wind from the sea, these moisture-laden winds. And I did a study on that, on the vectors, and we can see that this diagram here, which is taken from the 2019 book, Confronting Climate Change, which I put these arrows together, and you can see that against the John Crow Mountain, the winds are strongest. The small arrows, the small gray arrows, are the day and night wind, okay? And they always blow perpendicular to the coast. The northeast trade winds come always at 45 degrees. But when they line up and they're in the same direction, you can see on the right-hand side there, all right? They are tremendous carrier of moisture. And if people may say, well, that's not at right angles on the right, let me put the real map to you, and you'll see that it's definitely at right angles against the John Crow Mountains. No wonder that the John Crow Mountains, well, this is just the more information if anyone wants to look at page 319, page 325 of a book coming up in 2024, already written, but to be coming up in hard copies in January. So they have the same information to be explored in them. All right, and what corroborates I call it Harris's wind vector explanation. The answer is that the John Crow Mountain at Millbank has world records for intensity of rainfall, yet Millbank lies on the innermost of the three John Crow Mountain series of foothills. Why is that significant? Tells us that the power of the wind is so great that it pushes the clouds, rain clouds, far over. And so that, in fact, we have actually, I think there's only one river on the coast of that area, the John Crow Mountains, because the rain is mostly on the other side. And that's where the Rio Grande comes in. All right. So let's look at that. You can see that the big Rio Grande there is coming from the John Crow Mountain on the right-hand side, close to Port Antonio, and it ends up. And we can see here so many rivers from the Blue Mountain, but they're not a patch on the one Rio Grande. One Rio Grande holds the whole country to ransom. Let's look at what we would do if we had these artesian aquifers. You can see going over toward Jamaica from these Blue Mountain and John Crow aquifers, mainly from the John Crow aquifer again. All right, now my thing is stuck here. Yeah, just look at this. Just look at this. Look at the right-hand side, the right-hand column, where we have the one Rio Grande holding the Black River to ransom. 3 times the amount of runoff as the Black River. All right. And it's a runoff that's being wasted. We want to get that back in water banking. Look over on the left-hand side. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Blue Mountain rivers, and they cannot compete with the Rio Grande on the right-hand side. Okay. So what we want to do, we want to test these aquifers. After getting that evidence, we want to test them. We want to drop some test wells to make sure to have proof of this. That's what we're going to. It's very expensive, and that's why we had to do that evidential exploration first before we went into the proofs through the monitoring wells. So we want to convert runoff to groundwater. How do we do that? Well, we can pump them. We can pump the water out, but if we pump, it's going to be very expensive. And it's going to be costly in the CO2 produced by the fossil fuels through pumping. So we have to do another way. And what we do, we bleed the aquifer from below. Okay? We delay the runoff. The runoff is going to be dropped back into the aquifer because we're going to drop the water table down. And how do we do that? Okay, we do that with a system that's thousands of years old called the QANAT, Q-A-N-A-T. We tunnel through the Blue Mountains, 50 to 80 miles through the Blue Mountains, and put a sustainable number of shafts. Here's the diagram here. We're going to put a gallery right through the bottom of the Blue Mountain, right to the aquifer in the John Crow Mountains. And then we have a mother well, okay, and get down through that. And we tunnel from the right-hand side coming up. And that will bring the water out. And that will, let me just go back there. That will drop the water table in both aquifers so that the runoff will drop down into the aquifer rather than flowing overland. And that goes right to places that need water. For example, like the Western Jamaica, Central Jamaica, Kingston, and St. Andrew. All right. So this is what we're going to do. Not we're going to do, but that's my proposition, actually. Problem with building a canal is that it's very time because it took them decades to do it in the past. Well, nowadays, with these machines that we've got nowadays, it can happen very, very quickly. It's modern technology and speed. Okay. So we do wells with that. Perennial recharge. That's what the John Crow Mountain is. It never grows dry because it is so quickly responding to the intense rains coming in. It's gravity fed. The QANAT is gravity fed, no fossil fuels. It contributes to the reduction of greenhouse gases. The longest gallery in the world is 120 kilometers in QANAT. So if they can do it, if they could have done it thousands of years ago, we can do it today. All right? Okay, so let's move on. So we do not want to get into other methods which are not very productive of of the process. So we would concentrate on bringing the water underground from the great aquifers in eastern Jamaica to where it's needed by saving the runoff for the rainy day, which we call water banking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. So water banking is Professor Harris's solution to how we can mitigate the drought conditions. The Jonker Mountain, Professor Harris says, never runs dry, and we need to find a way to capture that water, move the surface water and bank it into the ground so that we can have sufficient resources when time is needed. We're going to explore that a bit further, Prof, but I'm now going to turn to Sashana Miller, who is our senior regulatory analyst here at OUR with over 15 years experience, especially regulating and looking into matters pertaining to the water sector. And I know she has some views on this. So I now invite Sashana to give a regulatory perspective on this. If you're just joining us, we're looking at the issue of quenching Jamaica's drought, exploring solutions for consistent water supply. Sashana, your time.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So throughout my presentation, I will put things into perspective on how the regulator views drought. I'll also go ahead and explain to you who the OUR is, what our roles are, the structure of the sector, because persons have been thinking that the sector is made up of one utility company. Defining drought, and then from a definition of drought, I will show some related impacts and vulnerabilities that exist in our system, and some mitigation strategies and measures that can be followed in order to alleviate or minimize the effect of drought. So who is the OUR? The OUR is a multi-sector regulator established pursuant to the Office of Utilities Regulation Act, and we have regulatory oversight over certain prescribed utility services, mainly the provision of telecom services, the provision of sewage services, the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity, and also the supply and distribution of water. So based on our legislative framework and under Section 4.1 of our Act, we have certain regulatory functions that we do perform, and one of our main regulatory functions is to regulate these prescribed utility services through their licenses, which would entail us to do mostly rate setting and service standard setting. But the role of the OUR is far more than that, because we do conduct knowledge-based research, and we do advise the minister on matters relating to prescribed utility services as we see fit or as is requested. So going specifically into drought, the OUR, along with other regulatory agencies and the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, well, we carry out our mandate to facilitate economic regulation of the water and sewage sector. And the main aim is to make sure that the policy's objective is met. So now that we know that what the OUR do, we need to become aware of the structure of the water sector, because the structure of the water sector involves a little bit more than just the dominant provider, who is the National Water Commission. So we all know that the National Water Commission is the dominant provider who provides utility access to water on a universal basis. But there's also the National Irrigation Commission, and the main objective of this company is actually to expand existing irrigation systems, or to plan for future irrigation systems so as to increase supply. There are private investors, whether they be international or local, and these private investors oftentimes invest in the sector in terms of public-private partnership, either with the dominant provider or other small investors. There are also private providers themselves. 18 of such is licensed with us, and they provide water services throughout the island to smaller developments. There are benevolent societies, and there are also parish council systems. So that's a synopsis of the major suppliers in the water sector. But is the water sector vulnerable to drought? Does drought have an impact on the water sector? To do that, I'd like to define what drought is. And by defining what drought is, there are many definitions for drought. Some definitions are even region specific, but the definition I'm not adopting today and throughout the presentation is the definition explained by the World Meteorological Organization. And this company defined drought as an abnormally dry period characterized by a prolonged deficiency in precipitation below a certain threshold over a large area and a period longer than a month to cause serious hydrological imbalance. So throughout, we know that Jamaica has been experiencing drought. But what is the impact of such drought? We have noticed that throughout the drought period, the country has been experiencing hydrological and socioeconomic impact. Throughout the drought period also, there are different sectors that are exposed. So it's not only water, but the agricultural sector is also exposed to drought. And it has socioeconomic impact on this sector as well, the energy sector, the health sector, as well as the tourism sector. So we know that the sector is vulnerable to drought. We know that drought exists. And so what we really need to do is to come up with strategies and methods to assist and alleviate these drought impacts. So one has to ask themselves, who and what is vulnerable to drought? And why are they vulnerable to these conditions? So to address the issue of vulnerability, it's important for us to minimize the drought impact where necessary, to build up our capacity, to target the root cause, and to adopt a practical drought risk reduction framework. And these are important things that one has to undertake. But just how severe is drought to the sector? Well, our various news articles and clippings shows that money has to be allocated in times of drought. Persons are urged to conserve. We can no longer water lawns at times. Car washing becomes a problem. Farmers have to be coming up with creative ways to gain their water supplies. There are a lot of measures being implemented to measure drought. A lot of parishes have been experiencing drought. Even though we may have rainfall, drought still persists and is prolonged. So it's very important for persons and stakeholders in the sector to have a drought management and mitigation strategy. And throughout my research, I found a methodology that was developed by the World Meteorological Organization that helps to develop a drought management policy. And it really helps with the existing vulnerabilities that exist in the sector. So it speaks of persons or the country on a whole appointing a national drought management policy. I know that there are some things that are in the works, but what we can do is to use this as a replica. So we can appoint a national drought management policy commission. We state and define the goals. We seek stakeholders' participation. There is some inventory database that we can pull from. We prepare, we identify, we integrate, publicize, make people aware of what is happening, develop educational programs, evaluate, and then revise our policy. So to develop a management framework is one thing. But after developing a management framework, it's very important for us to integrate this into the system. And there are 3 pillars of integrating this drought management system. We'd want to monitor it. We'd want to test for its vulnerability. We'd want to see if it's actually working. We want to see if there are any mitigation strategies that can help us to actually prepare more for this drought as they come along. So we develop a policy, we integrate it into the system, and we test for its long-term resiliency, or just how prepared we are based on what the policy requires. So how responsive? Does this policy make us more responsive? Are we able to recover in times of drought? How do we transition when this happens? And then will it actually result in a more resilient future for us? So I have here some very small mitigation strategies, because throughout a drought period, it is very important at this point for us to be more reactive, because drought has been happening. So instead of us being in a reactive mode, we would want to be in a proactive mode and have proactive measures, because we don't want to be in a crisis management system, because we know that drought will happen. We also want to develop a drought knowledge base, because it's very important when persons know what is happening or what to expect, their behavioral pattern changes. And so it's important for us to have this knowledge base and make persons aware. Some simple mitigation strategies also is just to increase the supply, to encourage conservation, reduce your demand, to have drought impact minimization and risk reduction strategy. So the dominant provider, since they have universal access, can seek to increase their storage capacity through planning and approving capital-intensive projects geared at increasing their supply. Water transfer, can we move water from where it exists now to where it is needed in times of drought? Reducing our water losses by implementing cost-effective non-revenue water reduction projects, and practicing small-scale water harvesting, whether it be rainwater harvesting, so that we can be better prepared in times of drought. Having sensitizing campaign to make persons aware of what is happening. And it's also important for all players or providers in the industry to actually formulate a company-specific drought plan. So that is all said and done. What can the OER specifically do? Well, given the OER's mandates, what we have been doing, we have been facilitating costs or looking at cost-effective projects to increase water supply during drought periods. So for example, the National Water Commission has presented different projects that are geared towards increasing supply. We've been encouraging the main provider to reduce its losses through designing projects that are geared towards loss reduction. We have established funds and financing mechanisms that can be used to finance drought projects. And in the long term, we can look at, because other jurisdictions do have different methodologies or tariff methodologies. And so we can look at implementing seasonal rates to send price signals that will help with conservation. And we're hoping that by doing all this, then we'll build a more resilient water sector. And so these are some of the things that I think we can adopt and I think can help us throughout Jamaica's drought problems. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Tashana. Food for thought. You have raised some similar issues to Prof, although there are divergent views on some. I note that you have highlighted the whole issue of water transfer, which seems similar to Prof's water banking, and some other issues, including increasing storage capacity, water harvesting, etc. And just the need for a policy, a national drought management policy and a commission, so that we can put a more focused attention to this perennial issue. And we are wanting to pick the brains of our other presenters as we go through the other presentations. So the Water Resources Authority has a mandate to regulate, allocate, conserve, and otherwise manage the water resources of Jamaica. Therefore, it is suitably placed to weigh in on this particular issue. I therefore now hand over to the Managing Director of the Water Resources Authority, Peter Clark. Peter.
Thank you, Elizabeth, or Liz, as we've been calling you. Thank you, Liz, and thank you to the OER for this opportunity. I'm going to now share my screen so that I can bring a presentation to you and your viewers. You should be seeing my screen.
Yes, we are.
Okay, excellent. So, as you've said, we're thinking about quenching Jamaica's drought. First thing is that we recognize, and I think all Jamaicans should recognize, that every drop of water is precious. Wherever and however and in what condition it still is precious. It is our job at the Water Resources Authority to manage this resource. And we use a method of integrated water resources management to really get this done, so that we pull all of the stakeholders and all of the systems together so that we can have a proper environmental and ecosystem sustainability. As you've said, we manage, allocate, conserve, and manage and regulate the water supply. And we do this in a number of ways. We provide license abstractors who are abstracting from rivers and wells, like the National Water Commission, National Irrigation Commission, and so on. And we do planning as well. And we produce a very important plan, the Water Resources Master Plan. We're ever mindful of the needs that water needs to be provided, that water quality is to be maintained, that water is to be sustainably exploited, and that proper wastewater disposal or onward use is always carried out. We monitor streams and rivers across the island, 129 points on streams and rivers, and we monitor wells, groundwater, 287, mostly for quality, but also for the water balance, for the quality. And when you look at the water resources status, clearly the southern demands, along the southern belt of Jamaica, are greater than the northern demands. That's where our larger population centers are. That's where our larger agricultural centers are. And that's all, as a result, that's also where we don't have as much of our surface water, generally speaking. Prof has spoken about the Rio Grande being our largest river. And so we do have a water shortage problem, especially in the high populated areas of Kingston and St. Andrew. We have been exploiting the Rio Cobre, as you can see. And we're at the point where we're not really planning to take much more out of the Rio Cobre. And what you can see here is that, generally speaking, in terms of the resources, yes, a vast amount of the resources reside towards the north of the island, but the demands are much more greater on the south of the island. So that's what we're seeing right here. Now, we have challenges, and the challenges with maintaining water and a good water balance, you have other issues. Apart from quantity, you have quality issues, especially your groundwater that can get polluted. And if that gets polluted, then it's much harder to clean up polluted groundwater than it is to clean up surface water that's flowing. With surface water, basically what you have to do is just stop the ingress of the pollution, and eventually it will run off and that will replenish it. So the issue, especially with groundwater, is the pollution. And we have many issues of pollution. Pollution from the bauxite industry, from the sugarcane industry, other industries, as well as, for instance, the practice of lack of proper sewer edge. So you have, absorption pits and so on. So all of these present development challenges. And we're going to look at a few of the main challenges. And one of the biggest ones that we will be facing will be climate change impacts. Prof has spoken about work that he's done on climate change. And the fact is that climate change is absolutely real. It's no longer apparent. So in all of this, we start by monitoring the quality of our groundwater and our surface waters as well. And what we've done is we've produced a map. And we produced an atlas. And this atlas contains maps and different types of maps, and they outline, we monitor specific points. So you can see all the monitoring points. The greens are limestone wells, the oranges are alluvium wells, and the blue triangles are surface water locations. And from these monitoring points, we do determine issues with pollution, and we determine other issues. And it may come to the point, and it has come to the point already, where, for instance, we may determine that an aquifer needs to be protected. So, for instance, we're in the lower Rio Cobre Basin. We are not allowing any new abstraction in that area. So if you're abstracting already, you're abstracting, but no new person is coming on to do any abstraction. It just doesn't happen like that anymore. A moratorium has been set. Also in that area, we put in an aquifer protection zone. Now, the aquifer protection zone doesn't mean that you can't build inside there, but it means that you have to build with care. And this red diagram here would show you, for instance, an aquifer protection zone in Southeast St. Catherine. So the white areas on the right are all houses in Portmore, Greater Portmore, and so on. And then you can see the delineated aquifer protection zone because it has been deemed that the aquifer is vulnerable and needs to be protected. This is exactly, if you look now on this map, bottom left, you can see the zone, and you can see, for instance, the Greater Bernard Lodge planned development. All right. So what it means is that we didn't say you can't build, but you have to build with care. So there have to be mitigation measures that are put in while you're doing your developments to make sure that there's no further damage to the aquifer. One of the measures, for instance, is that in the whole of that scheme, they'll have to put in retention ponds, and the retention ponds will help to improve the infiltration of any stormwater captured into the aquifer to help to maintain the aquifer. We see these all the times. Those of us who travel to South Florida see these lakes and so on in communities, and it's the same purpose for those lakes, to replenish aquifers. So Shauna spoke about, the different types of drought and the hydrological drought, and Prof spoke about it. And for us, hydrological drought is determined by the variation in stream flow levels, and if they get too low, for instance, then you'd be determining that it is designating an hydrological drought, or in other reservoirs as well, especially your below ground reservoirs. So your groundwater, basically your aquifers. All right. Streams and rivers may run dry, groundwater levels may fall in wells, and your surface reservoirs become depleted. We only have really two large surface reservoirs. One is the Mona Reservoir, and the other is the reservoir behind the Hermitage Dam. So it means that we have to always be mindful of monitoring for drought and assessing for drought. And to take what Shana just spoke about, and in terms of that policy, the steps have now been taken, and a drought management committee has been formed, and that drought management committee was very active in this past dry season and the season before. And the whole idea is to come up with not just the short-term plans, but to also present long-term, medium-term, and long-term plans, so that we'll eventually get to a point of resilience. All right, because we are able to make the seasonal hydrological predictions, and we have room for more growth, obviously, in drought hazard monitoring. And the WRA is probably one of is the main entity that should be put in place so that we can enhance our capabilities to monitor drought as a hazard. The situation is that we know what happens really. Rain falls, it goes into the ground, and it runs off, and it transpires, evaporates, and so on. But when the rain decreases, when the precipitation goes down, all right, the groundwater discharge, there's less penetration, so there'll be a little bit less groundwater discharge and a little bit less surface water discharge, and greater evaporation. That's the issue. And a lot of the problem is that evaporation. And then, of course, now, when it is really, really dry, then you're going to be over pumping, and then you have to find other solutions. All right. And when we talk about really, really dry, what does our future look like? Well, the Water Resources Authority in their studies now have looked at a scenario, an event horizon of up to 2080. And in looking at that event horizon and putting into the calculations the matter of increased evaporation, higher temperatures, and so on, the outlook by 2080 is more than, it is, I would say, grim. And it means that we have to start to put the measures in place to counteract this. So we have to put the measures in place to be able to be resilient with regards to the lack of lower rainfall and the higher temperatures and so on. All right. In the short-term response to drought, it has always been water trucking. One of the issues, of course, has been the quality of the water that is delivered, and so it is certainly instrumental and recommended that the Ministry of Health and Wellness leads with the drafting of water trucking guidelines so that we know what kind of trucks and the quality of the trucks, the quality of the water being handled, and so on. All right. We have produced and we have just now got tabled in Parliament the latest update to the Water Resources Master Plan. This assesses water demand, it assesses water availability, as I said, it incorporates the climate change parameters to an event horizon of 2080. And this document now becomes a major planning and development tool. And you can contact us at the WRA, and we will be very, very happy to put that document out there. In the short term, again, you've seen some of the responses have been restrictions, rationing, diverting water from given uses. So you can divert. The Water Resources Act of 1995 allows for the diversion of water from industrial and even agricultural needs to domestic needs if it becomes such a dire and grim situation. So that is there. And there are other measures, you can lease water and purchase water rights from private wells for public use and so on. And the law does allow for this. In the medium-term response, we've been building out water shops, and I think we should continue to build out the water shops. These can be served by trucking from where water is available, or by if the pipelines are long enough to bring it in by pipelines or whatever. This is largely an effort of the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development. Again, in the short and medium-term response, rainwater harvesting. I don't have to go too much into that, but rainwater harvesting can be more than just catching the water off the roofs for individual domestic purposes. We did have parish catchments, and those parish catchments are now being resuscitated and even expanded by the Rural Water Supply Limited and by JSIF. And coming back to what I was talking about with the aquifer protection zone, we could put in more detention ponds and retention ponds and put these in the development improvement process, so that it becomes de rigueur, it becomes the norm to be doing this sort of measure. Reforestation of watersheds is critical, and I don't think I have to say too much about that. There's the matter of building microdams. We did have microdams. 6 still exist of the number that were built, one at Hope Gardens, one in St. Thomas, and so on. And these help small farmers to be able to withstand the perils of drought. Also in the medium-term as a medium-term response, we are looking as a government and working with the National Water Commission to possibly take some water from the Rio Cobre and bring more water, domestic water, into the picture. In terms of irrigation water, there are projects that are being built out, Essex Valley for the farmers, Southern Plains in Clarendon. We're looking at Yalas in St. Thomas and others areas in St. Mary and so on. Also, soil management is important. All right, because with proper soil management and farming with the right kind of soil in the right kind of conditions, you can also help to conserve water as a response to the drought. This is just a diagram of how the content water treatment plant should be looking, taking water off the Rio Cobre. And so our long-term response is to make sure that somewhere along the line, no matter how we're going to get it done, we have to get it done. We have to have a store of, and I'll use prof words, a bank of fresh water. Now, in the long-term response, there are things that we have to look at. We'll have to look at, for instance, wastewater reuse. Kingston and St. Andrew consumes or uses roughly 60 million gallons of water per day, which means that they produce 60 million gallons of wastewater per day. So we have to recognize that wastewater itself is a resource, and it can be made suitable for agricultural purposes. For instance, it can be made suitable for aquifer recharge purposes. So this is important. It always has to be with the context that a particular quality is maintained for that onward purpose. All right. So it can be used in terms of irrigation development. I've spoken about what's happening in Essex Valley and so on. And the matter of reforesting the critical watersheds For instance, the NIC, the National Irrigation Commission, they are looking at a project that will help to protect groundwater, because right now a lot of the irrigation is water from wells, and that's very good water that is being used for irrigation when it could be reserved for domestic purposes. So what they're looking at is using water from the Black River um, for irrigation rather than tapping into the wells. So those wells could then now become available to an entity like the NWC for them to have additional water to augment their supplies in times of drought. And of course, the matter of climate change is a justification, because you have to preserve as much of your freshwater reserves as possible to meet those dry times ahead. Artificial aquifer recharge, or MAR, or managed aquifer recharge. So out in Innswood in St. Catherine, there already is a managed aquifer recharge project that is taking water off of the NIC irrigation canal, water that is not being used by the farmers, and basically it's put through a treatment process, and it goes back into the ground. So it increases that bank of usable groundwater for continued and improved abstraction in Southeast St. Catherine area. It increases and helps with the buffer zone between freshwater and saltwater, because if you pump wells too much, you can actually pull seawater up through the wells, and it provides storage for unused surface water in a regime which is underground that minimizes the effects of evaporation. So this system uses a natural topography, gravity, and so it's energy-free, direct discharge into the aquifer. You're using wells and sinkholes. You treat the source water, and you're using water that will be flowing away. This is positive adaptation to our need to respond to climate change. All right, this is just a diagram of the layout of the plant, and to the bottom right, you can see where the injection takes place at sinkholes and into abandoned wells. Just a picture of one of the sedimentation beds. People have asked, for instance, with all the water that's running away when we have storms and so on in Kingston, with the Mona Reservoir, this is a picture that was taken 3 days ago, Monday. This was taken Monday. I took this picture Monday morning. This is the Mona Reservoir, now full and overflowing. So that's it's going in the chamber. And everybody would say, so why can't we harness some more of this? All right. No, usually the problem is when we have the flood waters, they're high in turbidity. They are very muddy. So what it means that we have to do is we have to find a way to reduce erosion. That means more reforestation, improve farming practices, better housing development control, and also reduce sediment transport. So going to the rivers and the gullies themselves and building in silt traps so that you make the water that you're getting in the flood times, in the heavy rain and flood times, more compatible, more readily available to be captured in a condition to be captured. Similar situation, Sandy Gully. This is a picture of Sandy Gully in the last storms. All right. And what you can see is basically a full gully flowing to the sea. So just like our wastewater, the last five letters in wastewater are water. Also in surface water, the last 5 letters are again water. So we have to recognize again that this is a resource. There are other measures in the long term that we can look at, interbasin transfer to bring water from other areas in. We're doing that already with the Yalas pipeline. We're doing it with bringing water in from Rio Coburg. But then you can also try to see if you can, in moving that water, see if you can tap into some hydroelectric potential to offset pumping costs if pumping is necessary, and also additional storage. Maybe the additional water you move, you can't use it all, so you can store some underground. Now, this is one of the projects that could be quite attractive. In this one, what you're doing is you're moving water from off the Rio Bueno and at the Trelawney Senton border, and you're bringing it all the way to the south. Why Rio Bueno? Is because it is one of our most reliable rivers. When most other rivers, when the Hope River, for instance, falls by 85% in dry times, maybe the Rio Bueno only falls 15 to 20%. That's because it's coming out of the cockpit country, which is acting like a sponge and slowly releasing the water as opposed to fast runoff. So you will have to go over the mountain. So on the downside, there is the possibility, there's a consideration for the same water generating hydroelectric power before it becomes useful. And we're going to look some more at this hydroelectric and desalination potential, pumping the seawater from the coast and so on is a consideration. Raising seawater and then using the seawater to then come back down through the same pipeline to go through a reverse osmosis plant. On the way down, the water has stored energy, so you can create hydroelectric energy. And on the way down, that water has so much force that you can actually use its own weight to operate, to reverse osmosis, so that you can filter out the salt ions and leave the water molecules. All right, and there are other areas where we could look at this. We could look at this somewhere off the St. Thomas area. We could look at this somewhere off the coast of Clarendon. So the way forward in terms of technological considerations, I don't want to talk too much about hydroelectric power, but I want to speak about hydroelectric power in as much as when it also brings water. A HE project is about generating electricity, and it should be seen that way, with water being a byproduct. Now, HE is not new to us. Hydroelectric, this is the whole old hydro plant at Bogwalk. You can still pass remnants of this building in the Bogwalk Gorge. We have other hydro plants that, for instance, on Cider Island, that have been now, they're defunct, all right? And we have current existing plants. The JPS does have this plant in Muggety and others. And the red dots are showing where there is a potential to build out more plants. The green are where plants are already installed. And I want to focus on one of these red dots, which is the whole Blue Mountain Tunnel. And in this one, what you're looking at doing is moving water from the Buff Bay and Stony River through Trans Mountain tunnels first from the east to the west, and then from the north to the south. So it's 25 and 9. It's 34 kilometers of tunnel to overall. But basically, you're moving rivers, and in moving the river, you're also utilizing the hydroelectric potential. But the important thing to us in the water sector is that water then becomes available for onward use, and that's the important thing. So in terms of the concept of pumped hydro coupled with desalination, when you're using fresh water, when you're using your lower reservoirs fresh water and your higher reservoirs fresh water, well, then that is just for the hydropower. But when you're using the sea as your lower reservoir, then what it means is that if you desalinate that in the process, then you then actually are producing fresh water. So you could use solar to pump to the higher elevation, exploit the weight of the water again to force the water through membranes to remove the salt, and then fresh water is produced. So this is a concept that is there for us in the future. There is subsea desalination, where you're using seawater, and without going into a lot of detail, the fact is that you can, theoretically, what you can do is you can remove the salts using the pressure of the ocean above and produce the fresh water and pump that to shore. So the way forward is integration of physical planning laws, investment, development of hydrological and water resources, planning that includes the effects of climate change. And a lot of these are things that we've started already. A lot of these are just things that we need to continue, enhance. There's the Drought Management Committee to enhance and to give more teeth and to give more flesh on them. So going forward, we must remember it's more than water. All right, we have the climate change issue, we have the change in land issue. All of these impact and exacerbate our drought conditions. The picture is done by Marcus Garvey Drive a couple of weeks ago. So quickly, as I close, I just want us to look at the 6 R's. Okay, reserve, redirect, reduce, reclaim, reuse, and restrict. So what do we want to do? Reclaim stormwater, reuse wastewater, restrict fresh water. Let us calculate the water balance as we do here at the Water Resources Authority. Reduce freshwater demand. So reducing freshwater demand could mean that you're using the Black River instead of using your fresh water or your very pure water and your more pristine water for irrigation purposes. Reserving fresh water for future use and redirecting that interbasin transfer, bringing water from where it is in abundance to where it is needed. All right. Again, it's more than water. So even beyond what we just spoke about in terms of those water elements we are seeing right here about stormwater and wastewater and so on, it's more than water. Reclaim the watersheds, reuse our packaging or our throwaways, because water is used to manufacture the packaging themselves, restrict watershed degradation, keep water in the ground and keep runoff clear, reduce consumption, reserve your underground storage and your above ground storage, and sometimes you redirect, because as I said, the law does allow for the redirection from one use to another. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that very full presentation. And so we know that we are not at a loss for solutions, gentlemen. But before we get more into that, so we'll take our last presenter, because while the management of our water resources is a multi-agency approach, the National Water Commission has the unenviable task of communicating the bad news of water restrictions to customers when there is a drought condition. So our final presenter today is Glaister Cunningham, the Vice President for Enterprise Development and Performance Monitoring at the NWC. Glaister.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you on behalf of the NWC for allowing us the opportunity to share a panel with such esteemed colleagues and the opportunity to learn so much. The presentations so far have been extremely informative and interesting. Can you tell me when you are seeing my screen, please?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the focus of my hopefully short presentation will be on our actions and plans, primarily as Peter had done just a while ago, focus on our response over the last 2 years, and then on the plans that we have going forward to deal with future events. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this slide. Everybody is aware that the drought affected almost the entire island. As you can see there, we were below normal, below expected rainfall for almost the entire island. In the Kingston area, the green numbers that you see represented within each of those boxes or ellipses are the sources and production systems that we use for the KSA area, that's the Kingston and St. Andrew area. Those red numbers represent what were actually being produced versus those green numbers, which are the typical numbers during non-drought periods. So you can see, for example, one of the worst situations, the Constant Spring treatment plant, at the worst of it, somewhere around May, we were looking at 3.6 million gallons produced out of a capacity of 18. Similarly, the Hope plant, 1.3 out of 4.5, 6.4 from Mona versus capacity of 16. So that theme carried through for most of the drought period, and we had quite a challenge to manage the resources that we did have. This slide shows you what the Mona Reservoir looked like, both in 2022 and in 2023. This graph goes up to August. You'll see from the capacity of the Mona Reservoir, which is roughly about 800 million imperial gallons, what the levels varied as over 2022 and this most recent year, 2023. You'll see we went down to, in May, June, as low as under 300 million imperial gallons. It was a, I don't want to use the word dire, but it was a significant job to try and manage those resources. This is what the dam looks like when it is down at those kinds of capacities. You see that amount of freeboard, as you would call it, or space, versus the water line of the dam when it is full. We were down to as little as 37%, which is somewhere under maybe 40 days or so of future production capacity if it were to maintain that level. Similarly, the Hermitage Dam, it's just under a capacity of 400 million gallons, had gone as low as somewhere just under 150 gallons, a similar situation, 37.9% in May. We had a similar experience with many of our other sources. The Hope River was down to 20% of its capacity or flows, Yalas River 30%, Morshaman Wagwater 10%, the Ginger River 10%. The actions then that had to be taken, I'll start with the KMA and then describe some of the others that we did around the rest of the island. We had to reactivate some wells that had been, we were resting, and we rest wells for a number of reasons. More difficult to treat that water sometimes because of pollution events. Peter spoke to that. So we had to do that in both for the Kingston area and in Portmore and Spanish Town. We activated wells in Havendale, Beverly Hills, Cavaliers, Little Greendale Government Park, for example. We had to redirect water from our Rio Cobre system, an additional 2 million gallons. And of course, we had to adjust production at the Seaview plants to build some storage as well as to minimize the rate of fall from the Mona and the Hermitage dams. The Yalas pipeline has been referred to earlier in this event. There are a number of unauthorized connections from that pipeline, which is 19 kilometers of pipeline, or 19 and a half. We had to remove, and in some cases, we're not quite able to remove completely some unauthorized connections, but we certainly managed to restrict some. On a broader scale over the entire island, this again is a graphic showing deficits of supplies across the island, as you would expect, since the drought was across the entire island. And in that case, actions that had to be taken included trucking of water. We had to increase the fleet, let's say, from 19 to 70, mostly through the contracting of external contractors. The government of Jamaica started on an initiative of providing black tanks to a number of citizens across the country, 900 200-gallon tanks and 300 400-gallon tanks. We were forced to reduce our service level from the ideal 24 hours a day to as low as 14 hours per day in some areas, including the KSA. And we tried to embark on a number of public education and communication strategies. We had to introduce that ban that was referred to earlier. We had to educate persons on the reduction of waste, water conservation, and of course, we had to do our own improvement measures with some of our facilities. Those projects that are being pursued right now include an island-wide non-revenue water reduction, which I will explain a little bit further in a couple of minutes. The very important Rio Cobre 15 million gallon water treatment plant, which Peter referred to, which is a public-private partnership. So NWC in this case will be purchasing water from a private investor who will construct, operate, maintain, and transfer in the end the plant to us. That plant, that PPP has completed what's called commercial close, which is the signing of the agreement, and is now going through the process of financial close, which is where all the financing arrangements are dealt with, the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And we are hoping that this project will break ground somewhere in the first quarter of 2024. The Greater Mandeville Water Supply Improvement Program, that has been ongoing for a number of years now, and it's a huge project with scheduling completion for early 2025. There are a number of externally contracted projects island-wide, 22 of them that are in progress now, which include supply upgrading and expansion. There are 45 in-house projects, smaller projects that we execute on our own through our parish offices. The Port Royal transmission main from the Norman Manley International Airport roundabout into the township. And in the ferry to Rock Pond Forest Hills via Plantation Heights. Tenders have been invited and the works are scheduled for 2024 into 2025. Longer term projects that are needed now to increase our resilience and capabilities to supply water. We have in the west, the Rosses to Orange Bay pipeline. That's a 24-kilometer pipeline upgrading program. The cost, as you can see, there is quite significant, $41 million US. We intend to expand the Martha Brae treatment plant in Trelawney at a projected cost of $18 million US, which will involve the upgrading of the raw water intake and a pipeline up to the plant. The treatment plant itself will be expanded an additional 5 million gallons per day capacity. And then a pipeline now from Martha Brae into Montego Bay at a projected cost of $57 million, which will increase the carrying capacity of water and replace 33 kilometers of varying pipe size pipes to a consistent 800 millimeter or 32-inch ductile iron pipeline. Continuing in Hanover, border of Hanover and St. James, there is an expansion of the Great River Treatment Plant being contemplated at a cost of $20 million US, which, similar to Martha Brae, will upgrade the intake and the pipeline and also increase the capacity of that pipeline for an additional 5 million gallons. On the west, in Portland, we are upgrading production capacity. We plan to upgrade, the production capacity and replace and upgrade transmission lines from the Grants Level treatment plant to the West Retreat storage tank in Port Antonio and increase that pipeline size to a 20-inch or 500 millimeter pipeline at a cost of $26 million. In Yallas, the raw water pipeline that comes into Kingston is to be rehabilitated. That's a cost of $4 million US. And the aforementioned island-wide NRW reduction program is, as I mentioned before, I'd spend a minute or so on that project. That is probably one of the single most important programs that NWFC will be pursuing over the next 3 to maybe 12 years. That program will seek to reduce water loss across the island through a number of interventions, fixing of leaking pipes, pressure management, etc. What that does is the NWC is experiencing somewhere between 60 and 70% water loss currently. You can imagine what that looks like for the bottom line of any company. If your final product, you get no revenue because of losses of upwards of 60% of your product. So this program, excuse me, it's a very, very important one for us. The capital cost is upwards of $300 million US. Very ambitious, but we're excited about it. What the projections indicate is that if we are able to bring those losses down to somewhere close to about 30%, it could be a cumulative savings annually of 10.6 billion Jamaican dollars a year. So you can imagine that how that is an important investment for not only us, but Jamaica as a whole. All those projects and programs have an estimated capital requirement of $469 million US. So you can imagine that money is significant. We don't have all of it. We won't have all of it all at once, but we are working assiduously to try and source the resources to pursue these very, very important projects. I'll end on some good news. Right now, both of our reservoirs are at 100%. These numbers were as of yesterday. Probably a little more sober news associated with that is that the truth is that might be the case for maybe another month or two as we enter again into another dry season. But we continue to work, and I thank you so much for the opportunity to present.
I couldn't find my mouse. I'm so sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Glista Cunningham is the Vice President for Enterprise Development and Performance Monitoring at the National Water Commission. We don't have a lot of time because we actually went over our allocated time, but we do want to take some questions where we can. And gentlemen, I don't know, and lady, if I don't know if you have questions for your other panelists, you can feel free to post them here. But before I get to, I think I saw a few questions coming in. I'm going to ask my team members to put them in the Zoom chat, please, if you can. If not, I'll do it. That's fine. I want to pick your brain on something because in doing my research for this panelist, Michael Burke, writing in the Jamaica Observer in a column entitled Drought Solution by Thinking Outside the Box in July 2015, actually said, and I quote, "The truth is that Jamaica has never had a real water shortage, but we have a serious distribution problem, especially in times of drought. Every time there is a drought, we hear the solutions being offered, and this has gone on for decades. I have heard about a plan to draw water from Portland through the Blue Mountains, but it has never been undertaken by any government. It should take 25 years to complete, and every government wants projects to finish before the next election." So, gentlemen, and listening from your presentations, there is no shortage of ideas, both in terms of short term, medium term to long term. What is preventing them from being enacted, apart from resources? Because I also heard Lisa talk about almost a $500 million US price tag for putting in place some corrective measures. But what else? What is preventing this? I don't know if Professor Harris, Peter, Sashana, Lisa, do you want to weigh in?
Well, you've hit your head on the nail, Elizabeth. Fact is that these projects are mega projects. The solutions, the real solutions are mega solutions, and mega solutions mean mega bucks. And when you're chasing that dollar, then that prioritization becomes a little bit more difficult. The situation is, Michael Burke, I think, is pretty much correct. We've never really had a drought that has, shaken foundations. Let's put it that way. Glaister was down to roughly 40 days at Mona Reservoir. All right, but he did have that outlook that those rains were coming. It was not really, he was down to 40 days at the beginning of the dry season. He was down to 40 days at the end of the dry, at the seasonal end of the dry season. So that becomes an issue. I won't get into the politics of it, of whether it's not attractive when the project is going to take more than 5 years. A lot of these take more than 5 years. The content plan that Great Basil is talking about, I mean, they have just the germination and the pre-design and all of that already has been probably 3 years out of that, but we're looking to move ahead with it. So it really comes down mainly to how we're going to allocate the funds and what's priority at the moment.
Thanks, Peter. Any other panelists want to weigh in on that?
I think I would just support what Peter said. It's hard to it's an interesting question when you say what other than resources, because it is primarily that.
Yes.
The question really is, what can you do with that dollar that stretches the furthest? And Jamaicans have been good at that. We've been strong. We're used to having to stretch a dollar from the household to the macro level, and that's what we're seeking to do now, both within the NWC and within the water IWR grouping, that we're trying to come up with strategies. We're trying to come up with the most effective solutions with the resources that we have. That's the primary thing.
I asked that because Sashana talked about the need for a commission, a policy commission to really put some intense focus on this. And Peter kind of countered the fact that, there is a drought management committee that has been formed. Peter, I'm not sure if it's an as needed committee, a just-in-time committee, or is it a permanent committee that's constantly looking at drought and drought mitigation measures, or is it just in time for drought? I'm not sure.
Well, so far it has been basically it has been a just-in-time situation. And what Sashana spoke about now was the program, that drought management program, and for that now to devolve out of this so that it becomes there's more permanency. So what currently exists is just one part of what Sashana was bringing to us in a totality.
Yeah. On Prof
and one thing, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
I would like to say it's a little bit more than resources. When we are planning is very important. And planning for a holistic approach to rolling out a project is very important. So you could have all the money in the world and a project may have minimal impact. So it's to streamline and prioritize and to make sure that the projects that are to be coming on stream, they are properly timed so that they can get the best results and benefits going forward as well. So it's not only a money issue or a rate setting issue, or giving NWC money, it really has to do with planning, as my colleague was saying.
Yeah, I think Peter wanted to come back in. Okay, I thought that's what you had. Okay. Prof started the conversation about water banking. Sashana extended it to the water transfer and so on. And he talked about, I don't want to say exploiting, but exploring the Rio Grande. I think it was Peter who talked about the Rio Bueno River. Where do we go from here, gentlemen? Prof, where can we take this conversation? As we have viewers who are just parched for solutions. That's a bad pun, I'm so sorry.
Well, you asked where can we take it? And I heard my colleagues saying that, speaking eloquently about the lack of funding or the presence of it thereof. Everything is expensive these days, and my proposal is probably the most expensive of all. So I am not going to dwell on the money part of it because everything costs money. I'm just saying that if the thing is effective, if the corrective is effective, then I don't see any way out. Peter raised the fact about the prospects in 1980, and he's quite correct about that from what I have been reading and what I've seen. So we can't put a monetary figure as a negative, as a disincentive. I'm not saying my colleagues were doing that, but I'm just saying that they were telling the truth when they said, they are constraints. How do we get over those constraints is a problem that I cannot solve.
Yeah. Comments in the chat from our YouTube and Facebook channels. Patient says, before policies are in place, we will need to have such presentations like this in a face-to-face town hall meeting. Also, and discussions with rural and low-income earners. Put all stakeholders and thoughtful considerations into place. We must make conscientious efforts to control pollution of our waters. Thanks for that comment. Stephen is asking, I don't know if you're able to say, Glaister, who is the private partner with NWC in the Rio Kobe project?
Sure, it's a special purpose vehicle that is, the consortium consists of Vinci Grant Projects and two local partners, which are Jamaica Producers and EPLI. who are also equity partners in the venture.
In the venture, okay. There's another question. I think this is for you as well, Blister. In light of that huge price tag, that 469 million US dollars, is government joining with any private entities to undertake some of these projects?
In some cases, yes. So as I said, the Rio Cobre project is already private. There are a couple of other initiatives that could be. The government is in talks with a number of bilateral and multilateral agencies as we speak. I can't say much more than that, but that's where that level of resources has to come from. It doesn't exist
Yes.
anywhere else.
And as we prepare to wrap up, gentlemen, I think it was Peter who raised the issue of micro dams, mini dams, likely cost. Can you explore that a bit more for us, Peter? What does it take to put in more micro dams?
Well, back in the day, when micro dams were being sited, normally it would mean a lot of ground surveying and so on. Now with GPS and GIS and everything else, it makes it a lot easier to figure out where will be the best, where they are better placed. So a lot of the expense would have been in that preliminary work in terms of those surveys and so on. So that cost would not be so high. The actual construction cost, clearly construction has gone up, but construction of them is usually very simple. Usually it is just a matter of creating that bowl or that reservoir for the reservoir effect, and usually there isn't even any requirement for any placement of impermeable material and so on. So they have been, I would say that for the benefit, they are relatively cheap. What is the issue and what kills any dam or any reservoir is the rate of sedimentation. So what it means is that apart from just building it, whatever gullyway or stream is leading to it, there has to be upstream work to maintain water of a certain quality, to reduce turbidity so that it will last. That largely is it. And the other thing was the matter of the common good. A lot of these dams that we had, micro dams that were putting that had failed, was because somebody grasped and took control of that common good, and then everybody who should have been feeling the benefit were not feeling the benefit. Maybe it was on somebody's property, so they chose to be the person who not just control but had the greater majority of the water for themselves, compared to it being a common good. And largely these are common goods projects.
Yeah.
Minor but effective.
And before we wrap up, I want to leave my viewers with a ray of hope. I don't know if you can give us some hope from where you sit in terms of the next time. We don't want this to be another talk shop. And, I quoted from an article that was 2015. I could have gone further to quote another one that I saw in 2007, etc. What can we look at in the very short to medium term if it is that, and we will again encounter drought-like conditions in the island? What hope can we leave our viewers?
So if I go first, I don't know, sorry, someone else want to speak?
No, I think you went first. Go ahead.
Okay, Prof. I think so. I wouldn't say it's hopeless. I wouldn't want us to leave this conversation in any kind of state of depression. It's, as Peter had mentioned, we've not been out yet. What it takes is a concerted effort by all involved. So if we are able, and we should be, to continue with the projects that I explained are ongoing, if we're able to pursue, and I'm just talking about NWC for the second, the projects that we have planned, if the wider government is able to pursue those much larger economic good or common good programs, if at an individual or a family or a community level we seek to conserve, We seek to be conscientious. We seek to not waste. We seek to make ourselves more resilient by providing micro storage. The problem gets less. And several of those things that I just mentioned are not hugely difficult, particularly at the micro level.
Thanks, Mr. Paul.
Yes, I was going to say that, you know, this prediction about dire water shortages in the decades ahead, it doesn't have to come true, as Mr. Cunningham just said, you know, because as we said initially, we cannot control meteorology, and there's no indication that the rains are going to get less. Some of the prophets of doom are saying that they have no evidence for that. All right. So the rains will continue to come as far as we know. You know, they predicted that hurricanes are going to come. They have not happened. In fact, some of the worst hurricane periods have been in the years when it was wet, right? So basically, dryness and hurricanes have no scientific linkage that we can prove. So therefore, what I'm saying to dwell on the hope, yes, our rains will keep coming. We have not seen any evidence that they're going to stop, but it's up to us. It's up to the people who are in charge to make provisions, to trap that water. And that's what I've said. And I'm actually actively working on a proposal to the Inter-American Development Bank, and the same proposal to the USAID for the same proposal of tunneling, of dropping that water table to prevent the loss of runoff, and to bring that same water to replenish the aquifers in Western and Central Jamaica.
Yes, Elizabeth. So while climate change is real, and we all agree, we recognize, as I said, there are water resources comes in many forms, and we will have to look beyond the traditional. So yes, we have the traditional streams, rivers, springs, underground water, the wells, and so on. But the water that we are consuming becomes a resource when we are disposing of it. The water that is running off from these rains becomes a resource if we trap and manage it. So what we just have to do is we'll have to be coming out of the box with projects. And when you ask the question of, you know, what stops us, one thing that does not stop us is the engineering capability and that strength that we have strong engineers, and we have access to other strong engineers and people that have done it somewhere else, for instance. So the solutions, the solutions are present. The solutions are present to eventually bring us away from always being on the cusp of panic whenever we're going into a dry season.
Thank you very much, panelists, and to you, our viewers, if you're just joining us, we're just ending our webinar put on by the Office of Utilities Regulation in Jamaica, entitled Quenching Jamaica's Drought, Exploring Solutions for Consistent Water Supply. I want to thank my panelists, Professor Mark Harris from the Department of Biology, Chemistry, and Environmental Science at the Northern Caribbean University. Sashana Miller is the Senior Regulatory Affairs Analyst at the OUR. Glacier Cunningham is the Vice President for Enterprise Development and Performance Monitoring at the National Water Commission, and Peter Clark, the Managing Director of the Water Resources Authority. Gentlemen, lady, thank you so very much for being here today. Thanks to the producer of this webinar today, Gordon Brown, and the rest of the technical team. You can watch this video on OUR's YouTube channel, so feel free to tell a friend and to rewatch it if it is that you so desire. I am Elizabeth Bennett Marsh, the Public Education Specialist at the OUR in Jamaica. Until next time, take care.